best part of this story is I go back to the store where I was to buy my beef and my fish, and they're like, they all know me by name. They're like, "Why are you in here again? You were just here." I'm like, "Someone stole my bag of food," and they were like, "Oh man, that sucks." And then one of the kid pipes in from around the counter. He goes, "But can you imagine rolling into your neighborhood with that big roast over your shoulder on your bike? He's going to be the man."
This is the first part of my story about the time I met with Shaquille O'Neal. In part one, Frank, who knew about this meeting, asked me all the juicy questions, and we talk about everything leading up to this meeting. Why was I meeting with Shaquille O'Neal? For what company? For what business purpose would this serve? This is a blast to record this because I went on this trip to meet with Shaq, and Frank was desperate to know how it went, and I was purposely quiet about it. And so everything that you hear on part one and part two of this episode is Frank hearing about the meeting with Shaq for the first time. So we did no prep for this, and he just interviewed me so we could get all of his reactions. It was a very fun moment for me to meet with Shaq. We had a blast doing it. This entire episode sets up the meeting and all of our preparation going into it. If you are a regular subscriber and you like our show, please do us a favor and give us a 5-star review on Apple. If you are new, subscribe anytime. We'd love to have you.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
It's Friday. We're recording on an odd day for us.
It's an odd day, and it's an odd situation. We got all kinds of things that are goofy today, Ian. I'm in a hotel room in Florida trying to take a vacation, but let me speak to a manager never sleeps. Some podcasts, Ian, have guests. You know, The Tonight Show, all these other places have these incredible guests. Famous people come on their show, and that's the whole premise of their show. Not here, let me speak to a manager. Oh, no. We simply talk about star encounters. That's what we're going to talk about today, Ian, is a star encounter. I thought it was worth breaking up my vacation to do this while it was fresh. You and I have not texted or talked or done everything. We're going to do it in its raw form right here.
I'm ready, man. Let's do this. Like for the record, I told Frank nothing about this. He's dying. 2 days ago, I had a meeting with Shaquille O'Neal, and it was 2 hours long, and it also involved a company that Frank is invested in, and he has had to wait 48 hours to hear anything about this. So he is hearing all this for the first time, and he is bursting with enthusiasm about his investment and how it is being protected.
So I think I had lunch with my dad yesterday, and he's like, "How's that alarm thing going?" I was like, "It's going good, Dad. It's going good."
Well, I forgot that the sheriff's in for a piece, isn't he? What's he in for? Like 50 grand?
He's in for 50 grand. He's got a little schnitz.
My favorite line. So for Frank's dad, I've lovingly nicknamed him the Sheriff, and somehow it is stuck within his family. This late in life, he picked up a great nickname. But he's got this amazing mustache. He's a very stoic man, not nearly as gregarious and talkative as Frank is, but just an amazing soul. But he saw Frank for lunch a few months ago, and one of the first things he said to Frank is, "So are we losing our ass on this 50 grand?" Frank, it's got to be amazing talking about a tech startup with your dad.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, talk about your all-time great ideas. Bring your dad in on a tech startup. So Ian, let's. So here's how I want to play this. So you met with Shaquille O'Neal. So just talk a little bit about the meeting, how it worked. What is it like to get a meeting with someone as famous as him?
So why don't I start before that too, Frankie? I don't know that we've talked a lot about Keep, this tech startup.
I was going to get into Keep in a minute.
Yeah, so I think maybe just we'll start a little bit. So I am invested in a technology startup, and I'm also the chief revenue officer. So I have equity that I purchased, and I have equity that I've been given for my role, my activities. The CEO is a very good friend of mine that I've known for 20 years. We worked together at GE. He worked in the same office with me. He was on the same program as me. He probably came in 3 years after I did on the same sales program. And for a short period of time, he reported to me. I was his sales manager. So 20 years ago, we were driving all over the Midwest, making cold calls with customers, closing deals. After I left GE, he left shortly after to get his MBA at Harvard. And since then, he's kind of been a serial entrepreneur. He was on American Inventor, which was the predecessor to Shark Tank, for a bike rack, an engineered bike rack that goes in your ceiling called the Claw, and they've sold 1 million units of that. So he sold that company. He also started a company called CodeGuard, which backs up your websites, and that's the first thing I did after I left MBR was roll my sleeves up and dive in that company, because I had invested in it 7 years before. So one, to protect my investment, and two, it was just a blast. It was at a period of time where CodeGuard was kind of in a make or break moment, and sales and marketing was a big need that David needed help with. So obviously that's a little bit more of my background than programming and code. So I traveled
just a little.
Yeah, a little bit. So I traveled all over the place with David. We went to Germany. We we went around to a number of large hosts, spent time with him on the phone every single day until we sold that company. So that company, I think the return was close to 15-16x on investment. We sold it for about 30 million. And about 6 months after that, David called me and said, I got an idea. I want to run it by you, see what you think. And it was for a connected car alarm. So think Ring doorbells for a car. So this was a device that looks like an Alexa that would fit into a cup holder. And so at the time, this was all just theory. He had kind of drawn it out on paper. And the reason why David wanted to do it is his car had been broken into multiple occasions in multiple places in Atlanta. Atlanta, like most major cities, just has a major problem with car theft, car break-ins, everything else. And from my recollection of that initial call, I kind of poo-pooed it. At the time, I didn't think it was as big of a problem as he did because I hadn't experienced it. I live in a nice suburban neighborhood, and that hadn't happened to me. But I think the other part of me was just, there's no way this hasn't been done before. Like, my mind immediately went to Viper and, some of the cheaper dashboard cams. And my assumption was there's just no way no one's doing this.
So let's do this. So as I anticipated, you were going to basically interview yourself. So so let's think through. He calls you up. You think about this. You hear about Keep. It's kind of an idea. So what I think is really interesting, Ian, is a couple of things, right? Like, okay, you decide to unretire to do this. We're going to get into that in a minute. But when someone comes up with a concept, like what I do is concrete. Like the things that I do are real estate. You can drive it. You can see it. You can see what's around it. So what I'm fascinated by is the conceptual process of going out and saying, okay, we are going to literally change the world. This piece of technology does not exist, and we're going to create it. And what I would like you to kind of walk us through is you're kind of going down that road with Viper, right? Like talk about, like in the PowerPoint deck, you put together just a really interesting slide of kind of how that went. But I'm very curious how both you and David arrived at, there's a need, this is how we're going to do it, and kind of the backstory.
Okay, yeah. So it was months for me to be interested. Most companies, they just start with ideas, and then you have to just beat those ideas up and try to find as many naysayers as you can, or at least information to the contrary of what your thesis is. So David's thesis is there's been no disruption in this industry forever. The technology is weak. There's so much more we could do, and the solutions out there are not effective. So, and this is a very big problem. So my job, when he brings this to me and says, I really want to do this and I want you to be involved with me, I have to go on my own, not just listen to what he says and do research. And so the best way to do that is to act like a customer, as if I had that problem. And what's fascinating about this whole thing, so you go to Amazon, you look at the top 10 products, you type in car security, car theft deterrence, you take notes on what those products are. What are they? Do they work? You read reviews. I read thousands of reviews on every product for a car alarm you could think of, so that you can kind of see, what do people think of those products? You Google search the hell out of it. You start to follow. So I started following multiple sheriff departments that I saw were always putting out, in towns where the car theft was becoming a bigger problem. And what are those sheriff departments? What are those police departments recommending people do to protect themselves? So
while you were learning this, I was a little bit late to rap. It was kind of like when I discovered Biggie, and I was texting you like songs, like lyrics of his catalog, and you're like, yeah. I've known about this stuff for decades, but I was so excited to just like give you lyrics and things that I thought were fun. And what you were doing was the same thing. You're like, did you know this statistic? Did you wonder? Like, I remember getting text and like correspondence from you as you were learning about this.
That's a really good, that's so everything in the discovery process with the startup, it's fascinating. David has the thing he says where nothing hits the cutting room floor. We keep everything. We store it. We keep all that information. You never know when you're going to need to use a bit of information. So any new information, he's just insatiably hungry about new information. And he's specifically, he is very, very in tune to information that is contrary to what he believes. So I think one of David's superpowers as a CEO that's made him successful in having done this twice successfully with great exits, he is not, more than most people I've ever met, he's not into confirmation bias. He's the opposite. He's looking for information that attacks some of his, strongly believed thoughts already. And so he doesn't argue often when I call and say, I think you're off on this. I got some new information. He won't just take it at its word. He'll go do his own homework to see if what I've uncovered makes sense, but he's very good at fighting his own confirmation bias. And you have to be in a tech startup because all that really matters is, can you solve something? So I did a lot of this research, but as I was doing this research, I came out of my house one day in my nice, safe bubble of a community, and my truck, everything in my truck was all over the place. Everything from the glove compartment to the main console in the middle, everything strewn all over the place. A pair of my Maui gym sunglasses were stolen. And I'm like, holy shit, my car got broken into. And I talked to a few neighbors and their cars got broken into. And then we did what everyone does. You go look at everyone's Ring doorbells, and there it is. A group of teenagers slowly driving through our neighborhood, running and pulling up on door handles. And I called Dave almost excited about it. Like, you're not going to believe this. And there's a little bit of like and I don't know if this happened to you, Frank, but when something new comes into your world. So I wasn't thinking about car alarms, but now all of a sudden that's all I was thinking about, because I was trying to decide whether I was going to invest a lot of money and my time to be an officer in this company. The more I researched, the more I was in tune to hearing words about this. So I would be at my pool and a neighbor would be like, so-and-so had their car stolen. And I'd be like, no shit, that's like 3 blocks from where I live. And then all of a sudden I start talking to you and you leave your car running and people steal a rump roast.
Oh, I got to tell that story. as you started, there's a phenomenon that we can look up, and it's like, I remember the first time I ever heard it, it's like back in the 90s, if you bought like a white Ford Explorer, like all you would see on the road are white Ford Explorers.
Yeah.
But like Ian would call me up and he's like, hey, so-and-so got his car broken into. We're thinking about like Calvin Johnson, Megatron, the guy who played for the Lions for years, had his car broken into. Do you want me to tell that story now? Or you want me to tell that story later about the one where?
Tell it.
So why don't you kind of why don't you summarize? All right, here's what happened, and I'll just ask you what you thought of it. So I call Ian up, and I'm like in hysterics laughing, and I'm in a very fortunate position, right? So I had gone and bought a Christmas dinner and all the components to put it together, and like it was like a really expensive roast, a bunch of pork chops, like a bunch of fish, like it was $650 worth of stuff. And what I did, like a complete and total dumbass, is I went up in my office and I just left my car running. Thankfully I had my keys. I left my phone in my car. I left my car running and I went upstairs to just grab something. And invariably what happens when I do this is I get into something, I'm sitting behind my computer, and an hour and a half goes by. So as I'm walking into the building, I bump into the owner of the building, and he and I start talking. And he comes back like 5-10 minutes after I talk to him to say something else to me. So I'd already been interrupted once. And then someone's like, hey, someone's at the front door. So I figured it was the same guy again. And so I go down, and there's a woman standing there. She's like, do you own the black SUV? I'm like, yeah. She's like, the one that's running? I said, we're dripping with sarcasm. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I'm pretty sure someone just broke into your car. I saw a kid, and she described him, on a bicycle. And when I pulled up, his bicycle was like parked behind your car, and I'm pretty sure he was in your car. I'm like, okay. So I walk downstairs and I look, and it's like everything from my same experience, Ian. It's like these thieves, they go directly to your glove box, and they're like 3-year-olds. They throw everything around the car. So there's like crap everywhere. There's like a knife, and there's like all the stuff you have in your glove compartment, your flashlight, like all that stuff's all over the place. I'm like, okay. So I shut my car off. I go back upstairs. I tell Lee, I'm like, yeah, he broke in, but he didn't really get anything. He didn't even find my sunglasses. And then it dawned on me. I had just gone to Yellow Umbrella and spent $650 on food. And the kid took my soft cooler on his bicycle and pedaled off with it. So I called Ian, and I was like, you're never going to believe this. And he's like, I can't wait to tell David. But the best part of this story is I go back to the store where I was to buy my beef and my fish. And they're like, they all know me by name. They're like, why are you in here again? You were just here. I'm like, someone stole my bag of food. And they were like, oh, man, that sucks. And then one of the kid pipes in from around the counter. He goes, but can you imagine rolling into your neighborhood with that big roast over your shoulder on your bike? He's going to be the man.
Oh, totally. When Frank told me the story, it took him an hour because Frank gets into hysterics sometimes on his own stories, and he was just giggling, and I had to keep making him repeat everything when he would go back.
But I told my wife this, and my wife was like, you do realize how fortunate you are that $650 you don't cancel Christmas. You just go rebuy it. I said, I'm incredibly fortunate. But I think that's, Ian, what we kind of talk about, right? Like for us, car theft is often just an annoyance. Like someone steals a pair of our sunglasses or somebody does something, but we just go back out and we just go rebuy it. But if you start, and I think I'm going to kind of seed this and I'll have you answer it. When you started doing your research, you started to realize the average age of most cars, right? A car, if you're not a homeowner, the car is it's your biggest investment. And most people are driving cars for years, and valuables are in there. So we can joke about me being a dumbass and getting ripped off for $650 worth of meat, but normal, regular American people, normal people, like their car's a big deal. And this is sacred turf, and it's constantly being broken into. And I think, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, and the average person losing $650 of cash or a $650 watch or $650 worth of groceries.
It's a lot of money.
That could break them. Most people don't have a lot of money in the bank. So theft it's a big problem for them. And so I think getting back to finish, because that was a perfect segue. It was so one, there's the analogs, right? You start seeing them everywhere. When something gets in your mind, it comes in your universe, you see it everywhere. And I was seeing it everywhere, even in my circles. And I run in more fortunate circles than the average bear these days. I didn't grow up that way, but today the people I interact with have enough money where a break-in won't kill them. But I was seeing break-ins everywhere, even in my town of Vienna, which is, an expensive zip code. And so there's that. But then there's also, in that search for what are the current solutions, it's a question you got to ask. I was finding really old stuff. Like, you'd find all these top 10 lists. You'd see the top 10 sellers in Amazon under car theft and car security. And it's still the club, which is a big piece of metal that goes on a steering wheel that's been around since 85. You still saw Viper in top 5 lists. And Viper is so notoriously bad at false positives of alarms going off when fireworks go off or a big truck hits a bump, because it's vibration based, that it's been banned in a lot of big cities because it just they go off all night and keep the neighbors up. So it's not the solutions we were finding. One of my favorites was like 6 on a top 10 list was this little $5 device that just blinked red and did nothing else. It was a placebo. So it was basically just a deterrent that is kind of like the comparison would be just sticking a security sign in your front yard, even though you don't pay for the security, just to make a thief think that you had security. But that was one of the devices that I found in one of these top 10 lists. So the more I researched, the more I realized that there just wasn't anything good from a technology perspective. That got me more excited. And the more I researched, the more I saw, wow, this is an enormous problem. It's growing. There are a lot more vehicles on the road than homes, and Ring just sold for $1 billion valuation. So you look at analogs of other companies. This is months of research I did before and it wasn't just one call where I told David I'm in. It took him a lot of conversations where I was like, yeah, this is worth spending a big chunk of my time over the next 5 years on. This could be really big. So that's a little bit how we did the research, and the device was exciting. The product was exciting. We had 10 pending patents on it very quickly. We realized that a lot of people hadn't done some things we were doing in the space. So that was probably 2 years ago. We just raised $4 million for this business in the end of last year. And that's when Frank came in, and the people that are in on that $4 million investment are friends and family of David and I. So like we've talked about Frankie with real estate, it's one thing for me to say I'm in with my money, but when I start calling people that I care about and that I care about how they feel about me, I took that level of research up an insane amount, because I need to be, if you want to learn about something, go sell it, go teach it, go sell it. And I got a lot more invested just by raising that money.
Before we turn the corner on this, I want to exhaust something that we're talking about here for a second. When I quit NVR, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. You and I have talked about this multiple times, right? I ended up picking the space that I'm in for a very significant set of reasons. I thought that I could manage the downside because I started in the heat of the recession. So I knew that I could manage the downside. I knew that my asset was going to be turned quickly, like 90 days, and a market only falls so fast in 90 days. So I could always get my money back out. And I also realized that there was this, like my competitors, Wall Street hadn't shown up yet. And they're in my business in a big way now. Tech is in my business in a big way. But when I decided to get into this business, those things weren't there. So Ian, for me, what I started to really understand was I almost got excited, right? Like I realized, like, holy crap, I have an unfair advantage in this market because of my training, the things that I've done, and everything along those lines. It sounds to me like you guys have had a similar, before we get into the actual company and the deal, like as you're in this vetting process, what is it like when you realize, holy crap, this guy's right. Like we have an advantage. There's a need, there's an advantage. We're competing against people that aren't organized. And when your competitor is Jack Cleric, Lieutenant Jack Cleric from the Cleveland Police Department, we got to pull up that 1980s video and use it. And he's holding the club, and he's literally like talking about that. Like that has been a joke in my friend circle for 4 decades, and that's your number one competitor. Like talk about that excitement, because I feel like people who start something, like that's where good things start. That's where like good ideas and good companies start, is right there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's that I spent probably more time on anything than on competition. And you look at all these police departments, they come out and they say, hey, protect yourself. We've seen a rash of car thefts. Here's what you should do to protect yourself. Lock your doors, park in well-lit areas, park in a garage. And you read some of these, like, don't leave valuables on a seat where people can see it. And when you look at that, it's just kind of like them throwing their hands up. Like, there's not much you can do. Like, your car is not your own. Because if you think about those things, those are the same things that the police were saying in 1915 about a Model T. That's the exact same thing.
Right.
There's no technology, there's no protection. And so you read all that and you're like, my God. And, a lot of the other stuff you'd read too, people shame people. So it's like, oh, I got broken into. And they'd be like, did you leave your keys in? Did you leave it unlocked? Did you leave it in your driveway? Was it not parked? It's almost like it's gotten so normalized that people almost shame the person who got their stuff robbed out of their car as if it's their fault that some a-hole went and took their stuff. It's really wild. So yeah, the more I studied, the more excited I got about it. Felt like a very blue ocean kind of thing where, wow, there's a lot of runway. If our product does what you're saying you think you could build, David, we could kick a lot of ass. And my role in companies when I'm with David is typically on the negotiation side. It's on the sales and marketing side. So for me in particular, the challenges that I would be faced with in this business, I was very excited about, because I felt very confident that if David could build a device that he told me he could build, that we could absolutely run away with some sales on a product like this.
So for those of you that listen regularly, you know that Ian retired. The only thing he's committed to besides this incredible podcast is coaching baseball. So what I wanted to ask you is two things here. So what is your title with Keep, and why did you decide to unretire to do this?
So my title's Chief Revenue Officer. I fought David. I didn't want any title. I just wanted him to call me a equity partner or whatever he wanted to call me. But that's my title. So, and the reason why I decided to go all in on this, I think that's an awesome question. I think in your career, you're only really come across 4 or 5 people that, no matter when in your career you would want to do more. So obviously you are someone very much like that with me, Frank. But David is another one in my very small circle of people that I just trust implicitly. He's a lot like me in some ways, but it actually, in probably even more than me and you, there are a lot of things where we're very different. And I think we complement each other really well. Like I said, we've been selling things together since we were kids right out of college. So we really know each other. We kind of can finish each other's sentences a lot. But I don't know. There's just some people that I've come across in my career that it's 1 + 1 = 3, that when we have a discussion, normally both of us get strengthened and we get off the phone with a better idea than both of us had when we got on. And it's really been like that for 20 years. So he's a guy that I have fun working with. He's a fun guy to work with. He's the smartest person I've ever worked with. He's got an unbelievable brain. He's like a 4.0, president of the student body, Georgia Tech, mechanical engineer, Harvard business degree. He's a lot smarter than I am. But I think I strengthen him a little bit in that he does have an engineering mindset, and that I think from a sales perspective, I think I add a lot of value to him. So the two of us just make a good partnership. And so when David comes and talks to me, kind of like when you bring a real estate deal to me, I just take it more serious and I get more excited about it, because I know, 1, I'll have fun, and 2, I really trust him. He's someone I've worked with for so long that I don't need to kick the tires too much. When he has an idea, I give it more attention than I would someone else.
So I want to talk about a couple things here. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that I think we need to do a party, and now that everyone's vaccinated and the world's opening up again. I'm down in Florida. It's like fantasy camp. Like, no, the COVID never existed here. It's incredible. But I want to get Paxton and David in a room together, get at least 11 bottles of wine, and sit the two of them next to each other, and just you and I sit in the back with popcorn and just watch the two of them go at it. I think that would be so fun. All right, but in all seriousness, so in my life, I can think of a handful of moments or conversations that I've had where, like, I can remember where I was sitting, and the conversation. And this is an enormous compliment to Ian. Ian and I were talking. I was sitting in the parking lot in front of the Gold's Gym in Richmond. I was about to go in. The phone rang. It was Ian. I picked it up. And Ian and I ended up talking for well over an hour. And this was the conversation, Ian, that you had with your boss about, hey, I'm turning 40. I've got a decade left. And I really need to position myself. If I'm going to spend my 40s somewhere, I need to spend my 40s doing this in a way that's very different. And what ultimately happened is it wasn't what you walked in for, but you got a huge raise. It was a huge strategic thing. And ultimately, it kind of pole vaulted you to leaving when you did, because some of the things that you negotiated in that conversation. Do you remember that conversation you had with me and kind of talking about that? Because I'm going to pivot into something you talked about with Keith after this, but I remember that, like, my takeaway from that conversation with you was this: Ian is playing a high stakes, very meaningful version of chess with his career. He is being incredibly strategic in how he sets things up, and he's setting things up where he doesn't necessarily know exactly what the answer might be, but he's given himself 5 or 6 different outs. And I thought that was an incredible conversation.
Yeah, I remember talking about that, telling you what I did after the fact, and that was shortly before I turned 40. And I went into my boss and just said, at the time, I wasn't sure if I was resigning. I mean, I was almost giving him the option of, let's find my replacements, and in 6 months I'll leave. This is about 3 years before I left MBR, where I just kind of said, man, you paid me really well. I have a fancy title, but I'm still doing a lot of the same shit I was doing 10 years ago. And I don't know if this is how I want to spend my 40s. And I'm like, I like you and we get along. And I think it's worth me telling you that these thoughts are going through my head, so that you're not surprised one day if I tell you I was serious about spending my 40s differently. And what came out of that was, and I didn't really want it, but it was a big promotion, a big title. I was kind of handed the keys to all the offices in the company and millions of dollars worth of stock options. And I remember telling you that, like, I'm not sure that's what I was trying to do, but that's what came out of it. So I think that was their approach of saying, well, you are going to spend your 40s doing this. and ultimately that didn't work either. I mean, it kept me 3 more years, but it didn't. I did want to spend my 40s doing something different than what I was doing.
So when I talk to people who know you from that portion of your life, and there's not a lot of them that I have, that A, know you well enough, and B, that I have a mutual relationship with, where they'll speak honestly to me about it. But the few people that I do know about it are like, why the hell did Ian leave with leaving that much money on the table? So like you walked with a huge exit, but you left a ton on the table. So what I'm curious of is, why jump from the frying pan back into the fire? Where is this similar? Where is this different? Why? Why?
Okay. So, yes, I left a lot of money, 8 figures worth of stock options I left. And, but at the time I was working 15-hour days. I worked on Saturdays. I traveled all the time. And I was doing it in a business I just didn't care about at all. So it was kind of a soulless grind to make that kind of money. With something like this, with a tech startup, everything's exciting. Everything's new. I'm not working 15-hour days right now. There's going to be a point where I do. Absolutely, there's going to be, but I look forward to every meeting that we have now with Keep. I look forward to getting on our daily Scrum calls and listening to what our engineers are working on. There's just something so different, Frankie, and you know this, of inventing something and being a steward of someone else's ideas, which is what a big company is. So for me, this was one, it was going to be my own money into this, my own equity. I knew the owner very well and trusted him. And I could make a very big impact on something that was starting. Whereas even if they gave me the CEO role of NVR one day, I'm not going to make a big impact. You're still doing the same things that the founder created 50 years ago. So to me, if I'm going to get really busy again, I want to do it in something that's mine, that I have equity and my ideas are valued, and I could really make a big impact on the product, the direction, the strategy, the marketing, the financing, everything. Whereas I was never going to do that in a Fortune 500 company. No one is. No, even the CEO doesn't even do that in a Fortune 500 company because the board's telling them what to do, and mutual funds that own your stock, all of that. So for me, that's the big difference. And I'm still able to do this and coach all of my teams. I don't have David saying you need to be in Atlanta every day. He knows I can add value from where I'm at, wherever I'm at, and I can do it on kind of my own schedule. So I think the two are just incredibly different. They're very different.
I know that, but I asked it intentionally, right?
Yeah.
So my takeaways, there are basically three. And what I hear is this: if you work for a company and you're unhappy, but you like the company, figure out how to create a role that allows you to thrive within that company. And at certain places you can't do that, but like at my company, I've had these conversations with people, and we've moved across platform, we've moved to different segments, we have the ability to be creative. You have that at Keep because Keep employees can kind of write their own story there because it's not as structured as a Fortune 500. But if you do decide to leave a company, I had a conversation with I have a business coach. I've told you about him before. He and I were having a conversation. He's like, I'm going to give my kid a bunch of money so they don't have to go to college and just start a business. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. And he's like, wouldn't you take that deal? I'm like, no, I take both. And he goes, what do you mean? I'm like, I feel like college and I feel like working at Ryan NVR for 12 years set me up in a way that's very different than other people who I compete with in my space. And the reasons for that is they gave me a background, they gave me kind of nomenclature, background, structure. They taught me a bunch of different skills. And then I got talented enough to take those skills and do something else. Kind of like what you did, Ian. You built a skill set at GE, you built a skill set at NVR, and then you took those things and did something different with them. My third takeaway is you only get one life. And you've helped me with realizing, like, when you're in the moment, enjoy the moment. Well, you realize I have more money than I need. I don't love this anymore. The moment right now is coaching and being with my family and my kids. You and I talked about it a lot. But what I think is fascinating is if Keep turns into what you and I both think Keep is going to turn into, you may end up with more money than had you stayed at NVR, and you did it in a way that allowed you to be engaged, having fun, working with people you wanted, excited about what you were doing. And I think that is like a holy crap kind of a thing that most people miss.
Yeah, it's, and when all this happened, it's one of these deals where you said something to me before I left NVR where you said, until you shut it off, you have no idea how much a big company takes of your mind space and how much your mind is capable of creating. And I always remembered you saying that to me. And it's true, because once all of a sudden you're given 60 hours back a week to just use your brain, to read, study, talk to people, think, it's amazing how many avenues you can go in life. And, the key is just saying no to the first few that hit you to stay busy because you're nervous. So I had to say no to a lot of people that I've enjoyed working with in my career, because I just thought of myself doing the job and thinking, money is the only thing that would be interesting about that, taking some president job for another big company. but doing the day-to-day job, that sounds terrible. I'm not interested. And so I think you're right about, you can go just about any avenue, and yeah, if Keep does what it's going to do, I'll make significantly more than I would have made staying at NBR.
So that's a position of being fortunate. Like, I think it's worth pausing and saying that. Getting your Christmas dinner ripped out of your car and then just buying it a second time is a place of being fortunate. It's positioning. It's a bunch of other things, but there's fortune in that. And I think Ian has earned, through hard work, discipline, smarts, negotiation, everything else, the ability to create fortune for himself and opportunity, which is cool. So let me ask you this, because I want to pivot to the second half of this interview. I want to talk about what happened this week. Is there anything on Keep, David, your relationship, why you did this, anything that doesn't specifically deal with going to Atlanta this week that we missed that would help our listeners understand exactly what we're talking about here?
I don't think so. I think just to get everyone caught up, we have a prototype that works sometimes, and we are working our asses off to get a production device that can work 100 times, whether you make 1 million units or not, repeatable in any temperature, in any space, in any light, in anything. And there are 50 electronic components inside of our bill of material that all interface with each other, that are all controlled by 2 PCBs, which are circuit boards. That's the brains of the device. And there is interference. All of these have like little electric interference they're kicking off that are screwing up the others. There's a cellular module. There's 2 sensors. It is a highly engineered 10 patent product that works sometimes in our prototype. And it's probably going to be another 6 to 9 months before we have a consistent production device that can be manufactured out of a factory consistently, to where we could take an order of 100,000 units from Best Buy or Target or Walmart. And that's the phase of the challenge that we're in right now. We're not selling this unit. We have one that works, and we have a lot of very good renderings, CAD renderings, of what the device is going to look like and all of the other key components around the family of products. That's where we're at we're burning about 100,000 a month. We have $4 million that we raised. So there's probably, call it 3.2, 3.3 in the bank still. And we are racing to get that production device. And sometime around early spring of next year, we will have raised another 10 to $30 million so that we can go ramp up our inventory based on some sales that we've got. So just for anyone listening, that's where we're at in our life cycle.
So I'm going to come back at the end of this thing and talk about the need to spin plates and do multiple things at a time. But what I want to get into right now is, you just got back to Atlanta today. We're recording on a Friday. You flew to Atlanta Wednesday morning, and you flew back Thursday night. Yeah. Why'd you go? Let's go with the overview. Like, what'd you do? Who'd you go see? I want to come back into how it came about after. Well, you can cover that. How did it come about? What did you do? Talk to me about Atlanta.
All right. So the title of this episode is Ian's meeting with Shaq. So there's no mystery in this. In late January, David texted me and said, hey man, you got a minute? And this was like late at night. And I'm like, sure. And this is not unusual that he and I will talk at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Innovation strikes at weird hours. So I get on the phone with him. He's like, hey, I'm looking at this Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Atlanta. There's an auction item of 1 hour mentoring with Shaquille O'Neal. And like everything, these random thoughts that come across your desk, my initial thought was, what the hell would we do that for? It didn't immediately strike me as, something that would make sense. I'm like, how much is it? He's like, well, right now the current bid's $1,500. And I'm like, okay, what are you thinking? He's like, well, Shaq was an initial investor in Ring. Remember, he did all the commercials, and Ring is the analog for our company. That's the business analog. I'm like, oh shit, you're right. Like that. And he was involved pretty early before they sold to Amazon. And then the more we started talking about it, I'm like, isn't Shaq a cop? And then we start Googling, And I'm like, damn, he was a cop. I remember seeing a bunch of that. Like, and the more you look, he's been
In Miami.
He's been an
Yeah.
assistant deputy. He's been he got his training in LA as a police officer.
Yeah.
And the more we start research, I'm like, he might be the most famous cop on the planet. And we're starting a security business that's going to help police officers catch people that, that are in the crime business around cars. And then we start thinking more about his marketing prowess. The more I'm looking it up, everyone knows Shaq. He's probably one of the most recognizable people on the planet. And the more I'm looking it up, I'm like, damn, it's not just icy hot. This dude invested in Google. He invested in Ring. He owns 100 Papa John's. He's, you just go through the list of things he's promoted, been involved in. He's been a spokesman for Pepsi for 35 years, kind of a larger than life guy. And I'm like, shit, 1,500. Yeah, bid on it. Let's do it. And, so he starts bidding.
I want to interject here a little bit, kind of like your research on finding out like how woefully unprepared the car industry is for disruption. Like you were calling me about just like incredibly cool stories about Shaq. Like he invested in this, he invested in this. He didn't invest in Starbucks because he didn't think, African-American people, like his quote is, I don't think African-American people drink coffee. And now he goes 20 years later, I walk into a Starbucks and I get pissed off that I missed it. So like what I think is interesting, Ian, is this became a figment of someone's imagination, but between it being brought to you and between you going, there was a ton of work that went into making sure you were prepared to have everything laid out. So in case you got pulled in a certain direction, you were ready to talk about it, which I thought was really fascinating.
And so this is January. So if we had David on here, he would probably tell you the same thing. At the time, he was in Big Brothers Big Sisters because he's been to that event a few times with his wife. His wife is a vice president for Goldman Sachs. So they take clients.
We're talking about David here.
Yeah. So they've been to these charity auctions before. They've bid on these silent auctions before. And truthfully, it wasn't just Shaq. We were looking at 7 or 8 different people we were bidding on. And I think David would tell you part of it was just he was in the middle of like design engineering and selecting components, and our product wasn't moving fast enough. So he was kind of in design engineering hell, and he wanted to do something fun that might be able to get some attention to the company, something marketing related, something sales related. I think more than anything, he was just kind of looking for some diversity of experience because he was in the weeds so much product related. So we bid on a number of different people, but the more we thought about it, because all these bids start creeping up, from 500, 1,000 to 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. So it's a 24-hour open window, and all of the bids kind of keep coming up. And then as they get bigger, it'd be like, we can stop bidding on Julio Jones, or we can stop bidding on, we were bidding on a whole bunch. There were a bunch of Atlanta Falcons that were on there. But Shaq was the one we kept coming to. Of the more research we did, the more he was just a perfect fit to talk to him. And so it kept going up. We ended up spending $11,000 and we won the bid. So David quit telling me about the bids at some point. You know me, I go to bed early anyway. And I woke up in the morning with a little screenshot saying, you won, 1 hour mentorship with Shaquille O'Neal. Congratulations. And I think I sent it to you right away, being like, check this out.
You did.
You're like, what the hell? Why are you talking to Shaq? I'm like, don't know yet. We're going to make something of it.
I was in the car going somewhere and I got it. I like bleary-eyed looked and I'm like, what? Shaq? So, okay, what Shaq? So what happened between you guys win and you guys go down there? So this is January. We're talking 5 months later. Like, yeah, talk to me.
So January. So, Big Brothers Big Sisters sends you an email and says, we're going to work with Shaquille O'Neal. Do you have any specific dates? And this is Shaq. Like, this is one of the busiest dudes on the planet. The more research you do, he runs a podcast. He has a YouTube channel. He promotes over 30 different products, does advertisements for them. He is a regular host on TNT's NBA show, pregame, halftime, postgame. This is a busy, and just his charity work that he does is outrageous. He's right now an assistant deputy to the sheriff of Henry County in Atlanta. So, you know, everywhere you look, Shaq is somewhere. You know, he raps, he has video games, he's in movies. So obviously it wasn't like we won the auction and in February he wanted to meet with us. So we just kind of got silence for a couple of months, and we were okay with that because we wanted our product to be a little bit farther. We were okay with it not being right away. But about a month ago, we got an email from Big Brothers Big Sisters saying, here's a few dates to work with Shaq. And we, you know, at first they were talking about maybe we could do it at the TNT studios, and we got all excited. We were going to get a camera crew and audio, and man, we can use all of these clips of talking to Shaq about our device and about car crimes in general as a police officer. You know, and then probably a couple of weeks ago, they reached back out to us, the charity that is, and said it's going to be at the Four Seasons at 5:00 on June 9th. And so this gave us about 3 or 4 weeks knowing the date. But in advance of that, all I've been doing is consuming Shaq content since February, really. I mean, it's insane how much time I've spent researching the Big Diesel in that time and getting to know him. So I've been, you know, peppering David with little Shaq snippets since February. I probably personally have over 100 hours of research into Shaquille O'Neal in those few months. He's everywhere. He does everyone's podcast. You know,
let me ask he hasn't done ours, but let me ask a quick question. What do you hope to get out of this? Simple question. Like, what's the hope?
So going into this meeting, the most aspirational hope is we get Shaquille O'Neal excited enough where he wants to invest in our company and be a partner, help us market it, help us grow it, help us do things. Take it back a notch on the aspirations. If we could just learn from him about, you know, we're still in a place where we're making changes every day to what's going to be our first device. So I did believe strongly going into this that he was going to have some thoughts about our product that came from a different perspective of a guy who's been a police officer, a guy that grew up streets of New Jersey, pressured to be in gangs. You know, he understands car theft from a thief's perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, and he understands it from being early in ring in the security business. So I did believe no matter what, we were going to learn a lot by sitting down and talking to a guy like that. And the third thing that we wanted to learn from him is how he would go about marketing a product and getting as much attention as possible for a new technology product like this from the start.
I'm curious at the end.
Out of it.
Did he ask you guys like? So let's. I'll ask the question at the end. So let's talk about the meeting. You show up. You're there. You've done all your prep. What do you bring with you? How does it start? Like, how do you get into a pitch with a dude who gets pitched constantly?
So about 2 weeks before the meeting, David and I built a Google Doc. It was kind of our Shaq prep doc. And I'd been taking notes. He'd been taking notes on everything. I listened to 20, 30 podcasts where Shaq would just get interviewed for an hour, to the point where I kind of knew his answers. As soon as someone new would ask him a question, he was on Conan O'Brien. He was on with Oprah Winfrey. He was on with Steve-O from Jackass. He was on with Rex Chapman, the Knuckleheads. I just listened to all of them. And I listened to his podcasts. I watched his YouTubes. David read both of his books. So every bit of research that we were getting, we would dump into this Google Doc. And then really a week before, David and I started having conversations daily about our approach. How are we going to build rapport? How are we going to break the ice? And we would delete things, add them, bring it back in. So what we ultimately decided on was David was going to lead by thanking him for being involved in the charity. And then he was going to mention that both of them were military brats, and that Shaq's dad was stationed in Germany at the same time that David's was stationed in Germany. So the two of them lived in Germany at the same time, which I thought was pretty interesting. So we kind of decided on that's going to be our icebreaker. But then we built a list of questions that we would at some point like to ask Shaq. And that felt choppy. So the more we went through it, I said, David, we just need 3 main areas where we need to ask him open-ended questions. And then all we should do is keep peeling the onion by saying, tell us more. Because I think the conversation will be more engaging than if we pepper him with questions. But everything in the prep, if you think about it, Frank, we talked about what should we wear. We're meeting in a lounge with Shaquille O'Neal, 7'1", 380 pounds. Where are we going to sit? How early are we going to get there? Are we going to be able to get a corner table? We don't want to be sitting in the middle of a busy, Four Seasons restaurant lounge where people are asking for his autograph the whole time. So how do we get the corner table wherever that is? How do we case it? What do we wear? We're a tech startup. So should we come across as the cool tech guys with our Keep t-shirts, or do we wear a shirt and tie and be as respectful as possible? And we ultimately decided on sport jackets and button-down shirts with jeans and sneakers. And really that was just to show him as much respect as possible, because Shaq every night on TV wears a suit. So we didn't know if he was going to wear a suit and then go to the studio. So kind of along the lines of, be the best dressed person in a meeting. We didn't want him to come in and be better dressed than us and it looked like disrespect. But we bring a camera crew? And we ultimately decided on no, because we felt like he would be more guarded. And it could start the meeting off bad, where he was like, why is there cameras here? No, I'm not wearing a mic, or what are you going to do with all of this? And the truth is, if he wasn't interested in working with us after, how much would we really do with a bunch of footage of us talking to Shaq? Like at some point that would just wear off and it wouldn't be, you can't keep using it, because people, at some point, if I were Shaq, I'd be like, quit making it seem like I'm part of your company. So we decided not to record it. Little things. Do we ask for an autograph? The answer was no. We're not going to ask for an autograph. That's not what this meeting's about. If we want an autograph, I can go on eBay and pay $300 for an autograph of Shaq. That's not what this meeting's for. Do we take a picture with him at the end? The answer turned out no on that. This is a business meeting. Let's not fanboy out. So we tried to think of every contingency we could think of, Frank, of how this would go and where it was going to be and all of that. And so the meeting was going to be at 5 at the Four Seasons. Big Brothers Big Sisters was the one coordinating. So we still hadn't even interacted once with one of Shaq's managers or handlers. So I flew into Atlanta that morning, got to the office with David. We did our final prep. We got to the Four Seasons an hour early for this 5 o'clock meeting. I still was half thinking he's going to cancel because he's that busy. I still believed that was going to happen right up until, we got to the Four Seasons, and around 4 o'clock, we got an email from Big Brothers Big Sisters saying Shaq was going to be an hour late. So he was going to come at 6 o'clock. So now we had 2 hours to kind of hang out at the Four Seasons and prep a little bit. And his manager, incredibly nice guy, got there at 5:30. And I get the sense this is pretty normal for him. He gets to places before Shaq does to kind of see maybe case the joint a little bit. And there's got to be safety concerns, right, for Shaquille or who's there, what they're doing, a guy that big and that well recognized. But he got there. His manager came he had his kids actually with him. So he came over, shook our hand, sat his kids down at a table, sat down, talked to us for 10 minutes. David and his manager were at Georgia Tech at the same time. So they had that in common. Incredibly nice guy. Apologized that Shaq was going to be a little late, kind of told us what to expect a little. We told him what Shaq could expect just to make sure that was in line with what they thought. Cause obviously Shaq gave his time up. We wanted to know what maybe Shaq's expectations were. We had sent a long email with a bunch of who we were as a company. But we found out from his manager there that Shaq never read that and never got to him. So we were like, okay, that's cool. This is how the meeting's going to go. And then we just kind of sat and waited until 6 o'clock when he would arrive. And by the time Shaq got there, the lounge at the Four Seasons was crowded. All the tables were filled, people eating dinner, so it was a pretty crowded lounge, but we had the best corner kind of seat where there was a ton of privacy, where we had 2 walls behind us, a little bit Soprano style, right? Where you always sit with your back to a wall. Now that was a dynamite lead-in. Part 1 of Ian's meeting with Shaq is now concluded. Tune in to part 2, where we sit down with the big diesel who blocks out the sun as he walks into the Four Seasons, and hear how that meeting goes. The juicy part is just beginning.